Hello, and welcome to another episode of Great Women in Compliance with Hemma Lomax and Lisa Fine, hosted by the Compliance Podcast Network and sponsored by Corporate Compliance Insight. Today, we are entering the compliance stratosphere with a true giant in the industry, Erica Salmon Byrne. She is the Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Chair of Ethisphere, and she's our special guest today. Now, look, many of you, our GWIC listeners, will be aware of Ethisphere. I consider them the guardians of the ethical economy. They serve the Fortune 500 and beyond. They are the hosts of the annual Global Ethics Summit, the creators of the world's most ethical designation, hosts of the Business Ethics Leadership Alliance. And if that weren't all enough, they're also a standout leader when it comes to peer benchmarking on ethical culture and compliance. So it'll be no surprise to you why I'm thrilled to have Erica here today. I have long admired Ethisphere for its commitment to advancing business integrity in a meaningful way. And they back that up by research, data from industry benchmarking, and culture assessments, and really the creation of a wonderful compliance community. So who better to share insights around these things than the visionary, the Ethisphere's Chief Strategy Officer herself, Erica. Erica, welcome. I'm so happy to have you join us today.
Hemma, I am beyond delighted to be here. I have been a longtime listener of the Great Women in Compliance podcast, and I'm thrilled to be a guest.
Oh, yeah, we've got so much we can cover today. I plan to get through a lot, but let's start. Given your illustrious career, your contributions to the ethics economy, may we start with who you are and how you become this compliance professional for those that may not know you?
Yeah, and it's funny, Hemma. It's one of those things. If you had told me at various points along my journey that this is where I would wind up, I'm not sure I would have believed you. But looking backwards, it's possible to craft a narrative. I landed in this space. I like to say I grew up in this space in a lot of ways because ethics and compliance has been a newer and evolving profession over the course of the last couple of decades. In the mid-90s, before making the decision to go to law school, I actually had an opportunity to work in the legal department of a company based in my home state of Rhode Island, where I landed in the legal department as a kind of post-grad school, what on earth am I going to do with my life? Sort of moment in time, familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of people. And I landed in the legal department and I was responsible. This was a lottery company. I was responsible for doing background checks for all of the states where this particular organization had to file background check information on all their officers and directors. And the company was called GTEC, and they had won the lottery bid for the UK National Lottery. And while I was working in the legal department, again, in my 20s, no idea what I wanted to do with my life. There was a very famous at the time television show in the United Kingdom, and Sir Richard Branson went on to this particular television show and accused the founder of GTEC of trying to bribe him to stay out of the UK National Lottery bidding process. Very understandably, large investigation ensues. And I got put on point to do all of the corporate response to the allegations because, of course, the company denied it, the founder denied it, sued in court in the UK. And so I started going back and forth with the lawyers. Hey, here's the background, here's this, here's that. And I became absolutely fascinated with the whole process of trying to prove that this didn't happen. Who was at the lunch where it alleged to have been happened? Did anybody see something and not say something? And became so intrigued by all of it that I decided to go to law school. Went to law school, came out of law school in the very early 2000s, right into the middle of all of the scandals of that period. WorldCom, Enron, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And landed in the litigation group of DLA Piper, who at the time was counsel to WorldCom. And as corporate counsel, our primary job was to prepare company employees to talk to the bankruptcy court examiner's investigation counsel and go up to the Southern District of New York to talk to prosecutors who are preparing to put Bernie Ebbers and Scott Sullivan on trial. And that work fell to me in many cases. So I was the company representative when Cynthia Cooper was interviewed by the bankruptcy court counsel. And I took a lot of executives up to New York to meet with the prosecutors. And Hemma, to a person, and these were people who had worked for MCI for many years, to a person, they would sit in the bar car with me on the way back from New York on the Acela Express, crying into their gin and tonics, telling me about how their lives had fallen apart. And between those early 2000s and when I ended up leaving the firm and switching to the proactive side, I did 14 internal investigations. in front of a whole host of different regulatory agencies. And in every single case, our client was the company. And in every single case, my every day was my client's worst day. I mean, these were good people who were caught up in a situation not of their making, where an employee had made a mistake and the company was going to be on the hook for it, and nobody knew, and it was a huge mess. And it is impossible to do that work day in, day out and live that life and not think, isn't there a better way to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there something else we could be doing here? And so from there, I became very passionate about proactive compliance program design and trying to create an environment in which employees were comfortable speaking up and capable of speaking up and had channels that they trusted and that where the company would listen. And this, of course, is Sarbanes-Oxley. We're seeing the federal sentencing guidelines get revised. We're sort of in the early stages of the FCPA enforcement efforts. And I had the opportunity in 2006 to switch to the proactive side, and I jumped at it because, again, you live that day in, day out. How can you not?
How can you not, indeed? I love that. I mean, look, I know that building a legacy of ethical value is important to you personally. I love the framing of proactive program compliance design and that you jumped into that. That alone makes you a superhero in my books. And now to hear your origin story, I'm going to say it's impossible not to be moved by that. I hear you. You're on the Acela, you're hearing the stories. I really want to underscore what you said. Every one of your days was someone's worst day.
Yeah.
And at least in my experience, that creates for me the question, what are the conditions that led to this? And the question, what can we do proactively to change those conditions? I love that framing, Erica. That makes me understand why you pursued this field as a passion project. And thank you for doing it. Appreciate your service and appreciate what you're doing. So the other thing I think I like to talk about a lot is how we do that at scale. And a bit about how you've been able then to jump into it, not just as a worker bee, as an individual contributor, but actually someone that's creating a community and, again, creating an ethical economy. I know one hurdle to this can just be making sure compliance is not a cost center.
Yeah.
Ensuring the value creation compliance story is told. I think those are your words I'm taking, the value creation compliance story. So can we maybe talk about that, Erica? What is the value creation compliance story and what can we do there?
Yeah. And Hemma, this piece is, I think, really at the heart of the work that Ethisphere does today, because I have seen over the course of the last 15 years, in so many cases, meaning compliance teams being subject to budget cuts, hardworking compliance teams having their initiatives undervalued by the organization, because it has been hard to put a number on preventing a problem, right? Nobody, you don't get to trumpet your problem prevention money saving activity. It's kind of, in many ways, compliance has been seen as an insurance policy. And when budgets get tight, one of the places you look to save is on your insurance policy, right? But the fact of the matter is, if you step back and you ask yourself what it is a compliance team does on a day in, day out basis, a strong ethics and compliance team is in the business of managing people-created risk. And that risk at its heart is that your people are out in the world doing stupid things and not telling you. That's what it is. That's all it is. That's the heart of the work that you are doing. And the reason that work is so important is corporations are legal fictions. They can enter into contract, they can sue, they can be sued, but they can't actually do anything. The things they are doing are being done by their people, or increasingly nowadays by their systems, but those systems are still run and designed and created by people. And so thinking of this as people-centered work, thinking of this as mitigating people risk, that's how you start to think about it in the context of value creation. Because your people can be a risk, but your people are also an asset.
Yeah.
And if you think about the fact that the average company today has between 80 and 85% of its value tied up in intangible assets. Total flip from the 70s, right? 1970s, 80% of the average company's value was tangible assets. It was inventory. It was factories. It was equipment.
Yeah.
It was things you could put locks on, right? You could count them in an inventory process. You could hire security guards to protect them. Nowadays, It's much more amorphous, right? And your value as an organization is tied up in your brand, and it's tied up in your reputation, and it's tied up in your confidential information, and it's tied up in your intellectual property, and it's tied up in your people. So your compliance and ethics team is a critical element of protecting the intangible value of the business and growing the intangible value of the business. Because what we know from our research is a team where I feel comfortable raising my hand and saying, hey, I screwed up, I need help. That's also a team where I feel comfortable saying, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? I've got a product idea. I'm having an issue with this client. I need to try to figure out what it might work, what it might look like. Those are more productive teams. Those are more impactful teams. Those are more financially lucrative teams. And so if you can track a through line from I'm supporting a manager and creating an environment where somebody's comfortable raising their hand and saying they need help, through to the performance of that team, that's how you make the case that compliance is not a cost. And also to your point about community and the proactive program design piece, because all of this is about people created risk, there are not that many different ways that people are people. And I can learn from you, and I can learn from somebody in financial services, and I can learn from somebody in real estate, and I can take those best practices from tech, real estate, and financial services and make my program better.
Correct, because the unifying feature is the people, the behavioral science, psychological safety that you've referenced. And it's not so theoretical or abstract, this notion that if people feel comfortable leveraging their strengths and bringing to the fore their feedback, their advice, their ideas, that we will be more productive and more impactful as a collective. That shouldn't be such a remote idea.
It's not. And we see it in the financial data and the research, Hemma, that we track. You mentioned in your intro that we're the creators of the World's Most Ethical Companies designation, and we're very proud of it. We've been doing it for 18 years now. It's an incredibly robust process. But one of the things we're able to do because of that longevity is we have been able to track the financial performance of those companies over time. And every year we release something called the Ethics Premium, which is a piece of research that we do where we look at the publicly traded companies that are on the WME list in any given year. And this year it was 61% of the list. So it's not the whole list, but those are companies that report their numbers. And we compare those companies' performance looking backwards to a comparable global index. And every year we have done this research. We have seen outperformance. Some years it's 4%, some years it's 25%. This year it was 13%. But it's significant outperformance compared to their peer sets. And I always get asked the causation. And to me, it's about the fact that the kinds of companies, the companies that have the kinds of practices that land them on the WME list are companies where people are comfortable and encouraged to bring their brains to work. And when your assets are intangible assets, at the end of the day, don't you want to unlock the power of the brains of the people that you hired? Isn't that part of the point of having them there in the first place? And so if you've created that environment, you are naturally going to be a better performing company because you've got productive employees who are bringing ideas forward, who are innovating, who are creating. You're holding on to them. We all know the high cost of turnover. It's expensive to have to hire. It's expensive to have a gap on your team. So you've got productive, engaged employees that are sticking around and allowing you to unlock the powers of their brains. And you're going to see that show up in your financial results.
Erica, this is so powerful. I want to scratch the surface a little bit on this framing that you've given me. It's just beautiful, this framing of people-centered work not being, I think about human-centered work, but this is different. This is people can be the risk, people are also the asset.
Yeah.
I just want to start with the former. A lot of compliance functions are that people think they're there to mitigate the risk of people. You mentioned that. And then you start to see your people as an insider threat. And so I love that that's a reality, of course, not wrong there, but twinning that framing with the asset piece to realize that people didn't wake up in the morning wanting to be a threat or a risk, right? And you didn't hire them knowing that you'd have to mitigate 90% of their day of doing stupid. So if we lean back in then to the assets piece, of course, we're there to mitigate risk, but you can use the assets to learn about risk. You can crowd intelligence from the assets. And they're probably best placed to have the mitigation, the operational mitigation ideas as well. That to me, then now let's flip into the role of the compliance function where we started. So really, in terms of the brand and reputation of the compliance function, I love what you're saying. You're almost saying we need to think about how we position our value add. Are there to mitigate the insider threat of the pesky, stupid employee? Or are we actually there to help you leverage the strength of your assets, the assets that you've now said are 80% in value? So that to me is really powerful, Erica. I've not thought of that. I think it's really quite an eye opener, because then we get back to the question, if you're trying as a compliance professional to talk about your value creation, don't get in your own way by talking about you're only there for threat.
That's right. That's right. And Hemma, that's so spot on, because look, and we've done some of this, we've done to ourselves as a profession. If you look at the board report that we have been producing for years, hotline calls, substantiation rate, the investigations to close, all the investigation pieces, a strong compliance function should celebrate 1 million questions and no issues to investigate, because they're getting to their people before they did the stupid thing. Now, are we going to get there? We're not going to get there, right? People are still going to make mistakes and there's still going to need to be investigation. But stop leading with the end, right? Stop leading your story and your conversation with that piece of the role, because it's just one piece of the role. And unfortunately, because it's been easy to measure and report on, because we've got technology that tracks hotline calls, we've over-indexed on that piece of the role and under-indexed on the behavior change and education piece that is really where we should be devoting most of our time.
So it's back to your reference. We say it lovingly, people can do stupid things. We want to focus on that rather than the nefarious things almost, right? Because there's people, good intentioned people that don't want to do stupid things. You don't want to do things. Why not focus on? I love I'm going to quote you infinitely. 1 million questions is a better measure.
It's a better measure. And because it means that your people are comfortable asking for guidance as opposed to just, and look, Hemma, I've been in the space for long enough. There are a couple of hills I'm going to die on. Can we stop calling them whistleblowers, please?
Number one. Yeah.
Please, right? It is such a pejorative framing. And it is a framing that then automatically in our minds puts compliance in the role of the cops. And that's not where we want to be spending our time and energy, is people hiding things from us and being afraid of compliance and seeing compliance as the Department of No, right? Like all of the things we've all heard over the years as we've been in this space. We are asking people to ask questions because we know that the company is evolving faster than our policies can keep up with.
Correct. Policies are dead on arrival. Yeah. The only benefit for policies is if you can really operationalize it. And what does that mean? How do you good intentions? No, I'm with you. Okay, so I'm with you. Why not then reframe ourselves? I'm going to go back to your example, the individual on the cellar train with you crying in their gin, right? It is not motivating to the rest of the world. You and I, it was moving for us, right? We sort of went off. But that fear of the regulator, that fear of the tears in the gin, that's not motivating. But what might be motivating is there every day should be unlocking opportunities for the business, right? Unlocking the powers and strengths of the people they've hired. How about we are now the office of unlock? How about we unlock that intangible amorphous asset that you're holding on to and unlock the power and strength of that? How about we see the questions as a form of intelligence, not whistleblowing?
Yes.
I like to call it risk intelligence, but maybe I'll go one step further. Maybe it's opportunity intelligence. Either way, we've got to ask ourselves about what are the common goals here. The common goals, I always like to say the SEC, one of their goals is capital formation in the US. Think about that. If the goal of the company, the legal fiction corporation is to increase profit responsibly, then why not leverage your talents to do that and leverage your function then as a compliance function as an opportunity unlocker?
Yes. Yep, precisely.
I'm leaning into where you're going. That's amazing. Now, look, you mentioned the community. I know you've written or talked about pervasive compliance, it not being in silos, but really walking together with your risk owners or your control function partners. So kind of about that, like what can the compliance function do internally first to bring everybody along? No compliance officer works alone. No compliance function survives alone. If we can get out of our own heads and our own offices, how do we invite people into this office of unlock concept?
Yeah, I like to call it, Hemma, your sister control functions. And you should be in lockstep in an ideal state with your sister control function.
Yeah.
And those control functions, because again, it's all about making sure that when you are not next to that employee that is out in the world making decisions, you're not next to that manager that is sitting in that one-on-one getting the, hey, do you have a minute from their direct report? You want to make sure that they're making the choices that you want them to be making that are aligned with the company's objectives and with the company's values. And that is not solo work in any way, shape, or form, right? That is work that is going to be informed by the work that your partners in HR are doing. It's going to be work that's informed by the work that your partners in audit are doing, that your partners in IT are doing, that your partners in finance and in legal, if you happen to sit outside of the legal function, are doing. And helping those functions, and comms, that's another important one.
Yes.
Comms. Helping those functions understand the way in which you can elevate each other's work is a big piece of the puzzle. So instead of going to internal audit saying, hey, I need X, Y, or Z, maybe you've got an internal audit head that will tolerate that approach. My recommendation would be, hey, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z in my data. Can we talk about what you're seeing in yours so that we can figure out whether mine is the anomaly or if there's actually a pattern here? Hey, human resources team, I've got some really good thoughts on how I can support managers in creating a strong ethical culture and elevating them as leaders. Let's talk about how I can get that into your leadership development program so that everybody's happier going through that program. It is collaborative work. It is not competitive work. It is, everyone should feel like they're pulling in the same direction.
And look, they're all saying two minds are better than one. I mean, goodness.
Absolutely.
Three better than one if you're all moving in the same direction with joint goal. Unblocking together. I remember once I was interviewing a candidate and they asked me, how do they respond to compliance? And I was like, actually, the real challenge is the other internal functions. The truth of that is not that anyone was being difficult. It was that we were all doing our own thing.
Absolutely.
Roadblocks. IT couldn't do what you thought you wanted to. Comms couldn't do it. HR couldn't do it. Training couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. But actually, if you can identify the common goal, to your point, and then begin to see it as a challenge you can go on together, like an escape room together, as opposed to, I'm going to bang my head against this brick wall, and at the end of the year, you've got your brick walls, I've got mine, and never the twain shall meet. So no, I love that. I love that.
Well, and Hemma, the flip side on that too is, and I mean, this is where another one of my favorite themes comes in, which is storytelling. If there is a situation that you can point to, either inside your organization or inside another organization, where compliance had this little bit of a problem, and health and safety had this little bit of a problem, and HR had this little bit of a problem, and audit had this little bit of a problem, and no one realized that each one of those things together added up to a dumpster fire.
Correct.
Right. That is where you can get people's attention, because look, the fact of the matter is, I've got a manager that has 7 near misses and 3 policy violations and 2 audit issues that haven't been closed in whatever the appropriate time period is for your organization, and a 6% higher turnover rate than other business units, similar situated business units. Each one of those things by themselves might not cause anybody to jump up and down, especially in their day-to-day work. You put them all together, and what you've got is the picture of a manager who is not leading the way you need that manager to lead in that particular business unit. And you can use the power of that data layering to go get that manager the support that they need.
100%. No, 100%. I mean, there's so much to what you've just said. It actually works the other way too. Let's just say one manager has experienced a bunch of different things in their daily life. And they seem like nuggets in their own personal experience, but at scale, they're giving you lessons for each of those departments separately. So it goes both ways if we leverage information. I like to say, I recently watched the Inside Out 2 movie. Emotions are important, but they're information, not triggers. Don't be emotional about, oh, maybe I hired the wrong person. Ask yourself what there is to learn about the way you're feeling. One person may be showing behaviors that are symptomatic of systematic problems you could solve if you just come them. And again, if you made it psychologically safe for that manager, that person to share their experience, you all might learn together, right? There's
Right.
space for individual recovery, but there's actually, you can create bigger spaces for a systematic recovery if you pay attention. So I would write that. Got so much here. And then look, I know another of your favorite talk tracks I wanted to move to is about being outcome or impact driven as opposed to activity driven. So the who you gave is maybe these different functions are busy with their own activities, but where's the impact, the systemic impact? I think it's true to say on your current LinkedIn banner, you have this quote, and I told you you're infinitely quotable. Ethics doesn't just happen. You have to put in the time. Is that right? And I love that. It reminds me of the love is not an adjective, it's a verb. It's a doing.
It's a verb. It's a doing act.
It should be a verb. It should be a doing act as well. So talk to me a bit about that and how that impacts, how that relates to being impact versus activity driven.
Yeah, I'm very influenced, Hemma, by the work of Professor Jovino, who was one of the people who put forward this informal systems, formal systems dichotomy. And we all need both. You need the formal system. You have to have the guardrails, right? You have the monitoring systems, the policy systems, the training systems, the code systems. But if you think about your own experience working inside of any kind of entity, I don't care what capitalization structure it is, I don't care what size it is, I don't care how many people there are working there, the informal systems are going to be the thing that's going to influence the way in which you interact. And those informal systems are an evolving organism. And that's the reason why you can't just put out a policy that says, do the right thing. You can't. I had a CEO years ago say to me, I don't really think we need an ethics program. We just hire good people. Sure. I'm sure you do hire good people, and good people make mistakes, and good people need guidance, and good people are influenced by the people around them, and good people feel pressure, and good people make bad decisions and need help, right? All of those things can all be true. The reason that particular tagline still lives on my LinkedIn banner, Hemma, is it was the theme of our most recent Global Ethics Summit, because it reflects the fact that an ethics program needs to keep pace with the business it's serving. And if the business doesn't stop and doesn't just happen, then your ethics program can't stop and isn't going to just happen. You have to understand the business you're in. You have to match what you're doing to the risks that it's presenting, to tie it into everything else that the company is doing. The places that I have seen companies stumble most often are often tied to the times where their program is siloed or narrowly tied to a specific piece of the business and is not utilizing the available levers to help it have the greatest impact it can. So one of the things I like to remind compliance officers of, particularly when they come into a company in the role and they're new to the organization, is look at the company's values. Are you tying the work you're doing to all of the other things it's saying? Because, and again, a little bit of this is self-inflicted wounds. Many compliance officers are lawyers. We are not taught to be natural communicators. We are not taught to speak to and write to the average employee. You have to unlearn some of the skills that you learned in law school if you come from that background into the compliance role. It's part of the reason, Hemma, for years now, the last couple of years now, we've been asking companies about the makeups of their teams. And one of the things that I've been most heartened to see over the years that we've been tracking that benchmarking data is the diversification of background that we're seeing on compliance teams. Because you are not a cop. This is not the Department of No. You need people from all kinds of different skill sets to be able to do this work effectively, because you're trying to get to that good person that the CEO referenced, right? We only hire good people. Okay, I'm going to try to get to that good person with the guidance they need for the sticky situation that they find them.
Sticky indeed. And look, I love the concept you've talked about, the evolving organization. The stickiness evolves, the good people evolve, right? So all layers that evolve. And so what's our readiness for an evolving organization and evolving? So it's the question I have. The diversity of backgrounds or skills is critical. I've always said the first person I would hire would be a marketing comms person. That's what we do. Then right there with behavioral science, perhaps in their skill set. But one thing I always like to ask is, how do we make risk management, ethics, whatever it is, compliance, relevant to the people we serve? And there's something in what you've said. If it's an evolving organization, then we can't expect that it's just one and done, it's relevant. It's never just going to be relevant. We have to stay relevant, be ready for relevance. And relevant means keeping up with the evolution.
Yep.
What's your advice for making risk relevant then, given what you've said?
Spend a lot of time getting to know the business you serve.
Yeah.
Right. This was something that came up, Hemma, at our most recent Global Ethics Summit in a couple of different contexts. I think I heard it mentioned on at least 3 panels. And it certainly came up in the conversation that I was fortunate enough to have with Galvin from the Department of Justice, was one of our day one speakers. And it was great because we're really lucky that the department trusts us enough to do moderated conversations and not pre-prepared speeches. And I think the reason for that is Matt knew the room he was talking to and the people he was talking to. And it's an audience that part of the DOJ really wants to make sure that they're in contact with. And Matt said 2 things in that conversation that have really stuck with me. One was, you have to put the time in to understand the business in order to make sure that the work you're doing is going to resonate, because you are going to lose an audience member if you give them something that doesn't apply to their work. And so it is, without question, work to tailor your program to the people who are serving the company, but it is work that is worth doing to make sure that you are really giving people something they can use, because that is how they're going to hold on to it. And then Matt also had this line that has stuck with me since the event, which is, culture is the worst behavior an organization will tolerate.
Yes. Yeah. Erica, that one's tough, isn't it? That one. Because, it makes perfect sense. And then in the practical operation of that, it turns me back into a police officer all over again. I hear you. I'm very much a believer in we don't want to be the officer. No, we don't want to be seen as the police. But I like that you've mentioned Matt's second point there, because what are we going to do to speak the love language back to businesses, back to love as a doing verb, ethics as a doing,
Yep.
Make sure you're speaking their language, looking at their goals and opportunities, but also setting some standards. As I'm saying it, I always say I must do a podcast on parenting and compliance, because it's all right. It's a parenting.
Yes.
Yeah, try to make it relevant for the growing human that we are in charge of. At the same time, we have boundaries that we enforce with love. I say that just because it came to my mind, but what do you think about that? How are we going to straddle those two roles? I know organizations separate them, but what do you see in your data?
So some organizations do, they will separate, for example, the disciplinary decision-making process. The compliance team will determine if there was an issue, and then somebody else will be responsible for the discipline, which I think in concept is very understandable, to have the HR team and the business team responsible for the disciplinary process. The one caveat I will have on that we've seen from time to time is that can make it hard to make sure that discipline is the same across the business. And we know from our culture work that we've done over the years that organizational justice, right? That sense that the rules are the same for everyone, that, to quote George Orwell, some animals are not more equal than others. That is really critical to culture work. And so that's the one challenge a little bit, if you hand off the disciplinary part of things to another part of the business, kind of making sure that you're not losing the opportunity to calibrate. But Hemma, I think over the years here at Ethisphere, we've said that there are 4 levers in our experience that you can pull on to influence culture. And one of them is the disciplinary piece. It's who you fire, right? That matters, that there are consequences for inappropriate behavior. But the other 3 are equally important. And so those are who you hire, who you praise, and who you promote. And it's kind of about having a balance between all 4 of those levers that you're pulling on to try to influence your culture in the direction that you want it to go. And praise and promotion are particularly important because they are the small markers along the way to help people understand that they're on the right path. If I am getting praised only for my results and never for my methods, then I'm going to over-index on results. If I see the obnoxious bully salesperson getting promoted because he hit his quota for the 2nd year in a row, I'm going to think that's all that matters. And whatever compliance is telling me, whatever HR is telling me, whatever management might be telling me, that's going to be Charlie Brown parent voices, right? I'm looking at what I'm actually seeing success look like in my day-to-day work. And so finding ways as compliance professionals to support managers in promoting the right behaviors and the right people And we see this show up in our data when we ask companies about whether or not compliance has the opportunity to weigh in on promotion decisions. So can anybody get promoted above a certain level of the business? Or does the compliance team have the opportunity to give their input and explain the reasons why this particular person might not be the best candidate for promotion in this particular set of circumstances, and here's why. Those are the kinds of things that we see when we think about compliance really being able to influence culture.
Now you're making me want to go back a little bit to the values piece, because we've mentioned values a couple of times, right? And you said culture is the worst behavior we'll tolerate. So if I'm going to fire, hire, praise, or promote in a relevant way, it should be relevant to my values. Now we're going to go, how do I choose my values? What are my values? How do I make my values relevant to the people we're serving? Because if I'm on a disciplinary panel deciding firing, hiring, praising, or promoting, I need to know what behaviors will cause promotion versus firing, praise versus hiring. And that sometimes is just so fundamental. Like, who is the company? Who is the collection of people, to your point, that make up the fiction that is the company? We love these designations, world's most ethical. We love companies that care. It's very easy for us to throw together some values and ask the company to live by them. But if we're not operationally in practice living by them, because of the way we're making decisions or not making decisions on firing, hiring, praising, and promoting, then we've got a fundamental question. And I'll just say one other thing before I ask you to comment on that. I'm currently reading a book by Reed Blackman called Ethical Machine. He's a very experienced ethics compliance professional, happened to be talking about AI in the book, but he talks about the structure of a program versus the content. And this resonated with me because the governance, the policy, the procedures, that's something a lot of us spend a lot of time on. But the content, you can have great governance structures, but what if the values are, we will discriminate against X, and the government works to operationalize that? The government is different, right? So now we have to, what's the content? The same way you would ask, what's the content of your character? What's the content of the character of the organization that we then operationalize through these 4 steps, to your point, or other? So anyway, a lot, because this is a lot on my mind, but in terms of that, we're going to get to culture and measuring culture in a second, but what do you think about that in terms of how does a company even begin to make relevant value before they put the structures around them?
Yeah. It's really important work, Hemma. And unfortunately, too often it's the kind of thing where a new CEO will come in and they'll bring in a management consultant that they really like, and they'll come up with new corporate values and they'll put them up on the wall and they'll do a big rollout, and then everything goes back to the way it was before. And it's a real missed opportunity. So we can have a whole sidebar conversation about Larry Fink's annual CEO letters and whether it's a little too outsized or et cetera, et cetera. But he said something years ago now in one of his annual letters. I want to say it was maybe 16 or 17, somewhere in that vicinity. And he started talking about an organization's social license to operate being tied to its corporate purpose. And he really encouraged companies to take a step back and ask themselves, why do we exist in the first place? What is our reason for being? Why do we get out of bed in the morning? What is the thing we are here to do as an organization? And then, and he said, the reason that's important is companies have and can waste social license to operate. Again, the company is a legal fiction. You have to have people who are willing to work for you, and you have to have people who are willing to buy your stuff. And if you don't pay attention, and you have to have people who are willing to capitalize your business. And if you miss an element of that triangle, then you're not going to succeed as an organization, right? You are going to lose your social license to operate. Either people aren't going to be willing to work for you, or you're going to have to pay them so much to work for you that you can't afford them. People aren't going to be able to be willing to buy your product. People aren't going to be willing to capitalize your business. And the Business Roundtable did something very similar when they started talking about stakeholder capitalism. It's all around this idea that companies can't be myopic about the forces that they are navigating as organizations. And so using your purpose conversation, using your values conversation, not to borrow somebody else's values, but to really interrogate as a leadership team, why are we here? Why are we doing this work? Why does it matter? And what impact are we hoping to have? And from there, you spin out the governance structure and the content that then support the overall mission of the business.
And much more likely to make it relevant if you've asked yourselves those coaching questions. Like, rather than, you said, like, importing a very clever management consultant that doesn't really know your business. Back to the point about this could only be relevant if you get to know the business, the purpose. And then I love the triangle that you're referencing. Think about your investors, think about your customers, and think about your employees. And meet there, meet in the middle. No, very powerful. Erica, look, one of the things that you have done, you and Ethisphere have done together, is focus on measuring culture. And this is, I think, long before the DOJ put in their guidance that measuring.
Yes, we were out this one for sure.
But you've got, I wonder if it wasn't someone like Matt or someone his predecessors, even I was at the SEC, who looked at what you were doing and thinking, gosh, that makes sense, which a best practice regulatory guidance piece. So you've been, if I'm not mistaken, Ethisphere has been measuring culture and having your customers measure culture for decades. And the beauty of that is you've got decades of data now. So let me ask you this broad question. What have you learned from decades of data on measuring culture?
We have indeed, Hemma, been in a fortunate position to have been collecting data for over a decade now. And we measure, with our customer base, we measure employee responses to what we consider to be the 8 pillars of a strong ethical culture. And for any of your listeners out there that are curious about our work in this area, we actually just issued our 2024 culture report that is focused on closing what we call the speak up gap. And I'll get into what that is in just a moment. But anybody who wants to read more about our culture work, that would be a great place to start. We've got a data set at this point. Actually, for the 2024 report, we were working with a data set of just about 3 million employee responses that we have received to the survey since 2020. So this is like sort of pandemic era and past. It's what we consider to be the current data set that we're working with. And we ask questions about, are you willing to raise your hand? Have you actually done so when you have seen something? Who did you go to? How'd you feel about the process? What were some of the barriers to speaking up? How do you feel about your manager as an ethical leader? So a couple of key things that we have learned over the years of measuring. One is, and I actually have a podcast that I did with my colleague Bill Coffin on this point specifically. I believe very firmly there's no such thing as over-surveying. Everybody's, we're over-surveyed, we're over-surveyed. No, you're not. You're under-actioning. Mm-hmm. Your people are getting upset about the fact that you just keep asking them questions and you're not doing anything with the information that they're giving you. And if you keep coming to me and asking me to answer surveys, I'm going to stop if I don't see action coming from what it is that I have already told you about. And so don't give me over surveying. You're not over surveying. You're under action. That's the reality of the situation. So we have definitely seen fluctuations in response rate. I will tell you that the companies that actually go back to their employees after a survey and say, thanks so much, here's what we learned, and here's what we're going to do about it, those are the ones who keep their response rate steady throughout all of the winds and waves of events that are buffeting us on a day-to-day basis. The second thing we've learned, and this is the hill I will die on, your managers are the linchpin around which everything else is going to spin.
Yes.
Managers do not feel supported and capable of leading effectively. Everything else you do is going to fail. It's going to fail fast or it's going to fail in slow motion, but it's going to fail because the person that I listen to, the person that influences my behavior, the person that is going to shape my experience at the company is the person I report to. And if I am somebody who is a strong individual contributor who got promoted to be a people leader and has no idea how to lead, then you are going to have an underperforming team. So leaning into making sure your managers know what is expected of them and know how to do it and know where to go to get help, right? That is the other thing, particularly for brand new managers. They desperately want to have all the answers because they believed that many of them believe that saying, I don't know, is going to make it seem like they don't know how to manage. Yeah. You have to be able to support people to help them understand that saying, that's a good question. I'm not sure of the answer to that. Let's figure that out together. Yeah. That's a sign of strength as a leader, right? That's not a sign of weakness, but so many people feel like they have to have all the answers. They have to know exactly what they're doing. They can't tolerate dissent. And we see it show up time and time again in the data. And then the third piece is, and again, this is where I will say to my lovely, amazing, incredible colleagues in ethics and compliance, y'all have done this to yourself, is that the average employee does not understand that the phrase in the code of conduct up to and including termination, there is so much in up to and including that people don't understand. And we see this again show up in the data where people think that if somebody didn't get fired, that nothing happened. And those of us who have been on the inside of investigations and discipline, like, we know there's bonus impacts and coaching and training and promotion losses and all kinds of different ways that you can have consequences for misconduct that do not involve somebody getting fired. And if you don't take the time to tell people that, then they think you've done nothing when they raised a concern, because you have made the black box of the investigation so opaque that people have filled in the blanks of what happens inside it. And taking the time, making the effort to say publicly to all your employees, not just your people leaders, hey, this past quarter, we had X number of things that came up, and we had Y substantiation rates, and they were across these topics. And we fired 4 people, and we coached 27 people, and 18 people had a bonus impact. You have to tell the story, because if you don't tell the story, then in something as scary as an investigations process, people are going to fill in their own blanks. They just, and stop trying to convince them that you're trustworthy if you won't show them how you're doing it.
Yeah, the imagination takes over for sure, and it's not kind. Oh my goodness, so listeners can see my face, I'm so inspired. There's so much in what you said. So I'm going to have to invite you back to talk about some of this in detail, but let's just do a little bit of a summary of those 3, because those are important and they're hills that we should all be dying on. So the fact that a culture assessment is a risk assessment, right, which really should result in a to-do list.
Yes.
Needs to be remembered, right? You do not get a checkbox of writing a questionnaire or sending it out and getting some people to fill it out. You get the pat on the back is for doing something with the information you obtain. So I love that. And I love your framing of survey fatigue. I mean, I've definitely had that myself. I've had to lobby for space on a survey because people have survey fatigue. But you're right. Why? Ask the question why.
Ask why. Yeah.
Has to be what you said, the underactioning. So what I'm seeing, I'm going to go through all 3, but there's a theme here of trust and transparency, right? There's a theme of we're losing trust by inadvertently writing our nose off to spite our face. I hear you, not intentionally, but inadvertently leaving trust on the table because we're not using transparency. So be transparent about what you can do as a result, when you can do it, how you can do it, what you can't do. Even
what you can't do.
A really good idea that you just are not ready to operationalize, be honest about that and say, we heard you. And not buts. It's yes, and we will when, right? So I love that trust and transparency for surveys. Managers is the linchpin. I really want to spend some time on this, but you're right. Managers are often put between a rock and a hard place, right? The hard place is what the employees need from them, the advisees, and the rock is what they're allowed to do, permitted to say. Again, trust and transparency. I believe you're a great manager, but I can't trust you to do right by us because you are yourself impotent because of the conditions you be put in, or the ones we put in place. So again, back to trust and transparency. What's the limit of a manager? Let's be honest about that. Let's question why we're putting limits on managers when it comes to communication and solving problems. Why is everything outsourced? Why does everything need to be escalated? What can you delegate where a manager can really be potent as opposed to impotent? I love that. And the secrecy is a problem. The trust piece is a problem. If the whole way the managers have been told not to say something to the employees below them, best believe it's going to get out anyway, but now you trust us, right? And there tends to be a race to the bottom then. So that's that. And then the third piece, the average employee doesn't understand. I love the framing, the up to including termination. So again, it's back to transparency, not just transparency about what you can expect by way of due and fair process with an investigation, but what happens when things go wrong. And we do. So back to your point I think you made earlier, which is if we're not showing how we fire and or discipline, you don't have to, people worry about confidentiality. That's a basic concern. You can obviously protect confidentiality and share this data. I think you've seen that. So look, again, we can't spend time on all of them, but I do want to go back to managers because that's one of my favorites too. Frankly, I learned that going through the world's most ethical designation with you guys, right? The power of unlocking managers is beyond the basic. Managers are the linchpin. So I'm going to tell you what I've learned so far is toolkits and empathy and trust. But what else can you share with us, Erica, that people are doing that's working there to get to middle managers at scale, the tone and the mood in the middle, let's call it?
Yeah. I think it starts with a couple of things, Hemma. One, and so much of this goes back to effective communication, but it starts with one thing, with one piece of kind of table setting for the people leaders. I understand that you're being asked to do a lot. I get it. Today, I'm going to give you tools that make it more possible that you are going to be able to do the things that you are being asked to do. The thing I am bringing to you today is not an add-on to your to-do list.
Correct.
It is the foundation upon which the rest of your to-do list is going to be made possible because of the research on psychologically safe teams and how much more productive they are and how much doing this work that kind of feels squishy sometimes, how much it's going to contribute to the hard metrics that you're being asked to underpin. So that's the first piece. You have to acknowledge the mindset the managers are coming in through. The second piece is remind people that everyone, or we've always been talking about tone at the top. And 2 years ago now at our Global Ethics Summit, Yusri from Amazon used a phrase that has stuck with me ever since, which is everybody's somebody's top.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's somebody's top. You have the opportunity to be a role model, and you are going to be a role model whether you like it or not. So what kind of role model do you want to be? That's kind of piece number 2. Start with that empathy, acknowledge that they're being asked to do a lot, remind them of their outsized impact as a people leader inside their organization, regardless of whether they think they have it or not. And then give them tools that they can actually go out and use. So we built an approachability self-assessment for managers that is available to all of our Bella members. And it invites managers to ask them some questions about how approachable they are as a people leader. One of the things that I love to use, building on Amy Edmondson's great research on failure, what's your response when things go wrong? When things go wrong for your team, what's your response? That is going to tell you so much about whether or not your employees are comfortable coming to you with questions or concerns. You can even, if you want to you only have time to ask yourself one question. Is everything that my employees bring to me a dumpster fire? Because if it is, then that means that you are probably inadvertently creating an environment where your people are afraid of you.
Yeah.
And they're only going to come to you with a problem when they have no other choice. How can you create an environment where people are comfortable collaborating so that, and I'm not saying that, you still want your people to have autonomy and to make their own decisions and to run their own work, but maybe you get garbage can fires instead of dumpster fires. Like maybe you get little trash can fires instead of dumpster fires. Just getting to a place where your people are comfortable asking you for help earlier so that you can fix things before they are an absolute unmitigated disaster. That's the goal. And you can ask yourself a lot of questions if you're open to that level of assessment as a people leader and really make a difference.
I love those. I love those curious coaching questions that are self-reflective and really open a mind of possibilities. I also like the radical empathy, compassion, and curiosity you're showing when you say to the managers, we get you busy. We get you do a lot. We're asking you for something else. But also back to something you said earlier, this is pervasive. This is not compliance as an add-on. This is actually a way of showing up, for the people around you. It will help you not just with an ethical dilemma, but with a product dilemma, a coding dilemma, whatever it is that you're trying to do, a manufacturing dilemma, safety dilemma. We've seen many of the compliance cases. Boeing, we're talking about just somebody, if they talked about the bolts on the door, right? And felt not to use that one example, but there's so many like that where it's in your everyday work that these approachabilities, attitudes to failure, creating a situation where everything's a dumpster fire, those things are important for everything, not just ethics and regulations. So
that's right. That's right. And that's one of I think the key points, Hemma, because it's so easy when compliance walks into the room to do a manager training for the managers to be like, I'm here to listen to ethics and compliance.
Correct.
And if you can start with, look, what I'm going to work with you today goes so far beyond the boundaries of the ethics and compliance program. Is speak up culture is not just one where employees are comfortable raising their hand when they have seen a conflict of interest. A speak up culture is, hey, don't climb that ladder because of the reason X, Y, and Z. A speak up culture is, I've got a client concern. A speak up culture is, I've got an idea for a product. A speak up culture is, I think there might be something wrong with this code. A speak up culture is, hey, should I use ChatGPT to make this code better? Oh, maybe not, because then my company's code is in the data lake for anybody else to see. A speak up culture gets in front of mistakes. And all shapes and sizes. A speak up culture also empowers idea.
Yes.
And so helping your managers understand that they're there to learn a skill that will make their teams better. They're not there to listen passively to ethics and compliance.
Correct. And it then goes back to that kind of go together with your risk controllers, go together with your cross-functional partners. You can put a link to the code of conduct in any training, right? That's not what we're here to do. We're here to the movement, right? In many ways. I think it now reminded me of another book I was reading. I was reading a book called The T-Shaped Lawyer by Peter Connor. It's about lawyers, but the idea of being T-shaped, which means you're pervasive across the org, not just for a new vertical, another checkbox for the manager to have to do some training, but actually we see them as one human being having experience with everything they need to know. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's again really important to me to figure out how to reach the mood in the middle. And it does sound like the basic tools of empathy and curiosity and compassion, and then maybe trying to scale that within that. Think about not just how you're giving information, but how you're receiving information. It's really
That's right. That's right. And your managers, Hemma, this goes back to the COSO framework. Your people leaders, your people are your first line of defense. And the better a job you do preparing those people to be your first line of defense, that's how a lean compliance team makes an impact.
Correct. So the second line of defense isn't just to catch them when they fall. It's actually to facilitate the work done by the first line of defense, facilitate the ethical and other decision making. That's creation of psychological safety in the conditions where you mentioned the pressure that a manager might be under. What's created the pressure? Maybe we can alleviate the pressure as well, rather than just acknowledge. No, I like that.
No, exactly. And I mean, look, the second line of defense, if we continue to use the wartime analogy, the second line of defense, one of their jobs was to feed the first line so that hopefully you don't need the second line or the third line, right? Those second and third lines in that trench warfare model that we get the analogy from, they were there to send stuff to the first line. They were making sure that the first line had what it needed to be able to defend effectively. That's the purpose of the second and third line of defense. In the COSO model, compliance and ethics, HR, control functions, and then audit. The purpose is to have the strongest first line you possibly can so that the organization flourishes.
And who could argue with that as a goal? It's just magnificent, isn't it? Like, why not work every day towards that? I love it. Thank you for giving me my purpose statement. I love this. So look, we could talk all day. There was one other thing I really wanted to talk to you about, because something that it's been very rewarding for me in my connection with you and my connection with Ethisphere. You mentioned Ethisphere. So I met Ethisphere, I think, at a Bella event. Through Amazon. I also met Adam Hunt from Netflix there. You introduced me to my counterpart at Apple and Meta, and it was just beautiful. This Business Ethics Leadership Alliance program that you've got, kind of concierge program for those of us that want to network, where you're helping us with that, helping us answer questions, really has been powerful for me. So I want to our last topic really of the day is the power of community in this profession. Yeah. And what that means to you and what you're doing, whether personally or through Ethisphere, to create and leverage the strength of community for us. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's a key piece, Hemma, of what we do here at Ethisphere and what I do, a lot of how I spend my time, because in addition to all of my other titles, one of my roles at Ethisphere is I serve as the chair of Bella. And I take that piece of things very seriously, because to me, the job of being an ethics and compliance professional inside an organization can be a very lonely exercise. You probably don't have a bunch of teammates around you. You're dealing with some people stuff, or as one of my favorite compliance officers, Melissa Stapleton Barnes from Lilly, used to say, people just keep being people. And so the power of community is enormous. And then David Howard, the former GC at Microsoft, gave us Bella's tagline a little bit more than a decade ago, when he made the comment at one of our early Bella roundtables that there's no competition in compliance. And that really is the heart of the purpose of the community. It's the ability to come together, to support each other, to share best practices, to say to someone who gets it, here's what I'm dealing with. What can I do about it? What have you done about it? Who's got a good idea? And our opportunity to be the center of that loose network of professionals who are doing good work every day and need all the help they can get. That's a good reason to get out of bed in the morning.
So true. So true. And so powerful. So I'm going to give you a tagline. The Global Ethics Summit, I like to say, come for the content, leave with the people. I like that. I like very much that.
my goal, Hemma, for any Bella event that I host of any size or that I participate in of any size, I want you to leave with 2 new friends and 5 new ideas.
And that's the minimum, honestly. In my experience, I've been at the Global Ethics Summit a couple of years now, and that's my experience. The same with Bella. You really do leave with people and ideas. I mean, my listeners won't have seen me. You will. I'm jotting down everything you say because this is my own personal masterclass. And I'm glad it's recorded for the listeners too. So thank you. I know mentoring, coaching community is important to you personally, and really grateful again for the community you're providing for us. That's what GWIC tries to do for Great Women in Compliance. So I hate to end this because we could go on for hours, but let me ask you just your parting thoughts then for our Great Women in Compliance listeners. What would you like to leave them with as we go into this week?
I think what I would like to leave them with is, so we did our own values and purpose exercise at Ethisphere a couple of years ago. And one of our values at Ethisphere is relentless curiosity. And part of the reason we've specifically picked that as a value is I feel like the community that we work with, the companies that we partner with, the people that we serve here are all continuously looking to learn. And it's a young profession. There's an enormous amount we can learn from other parts of the ecosystem, whether it be adult learning research or behavioral ethics or what safety has been able to accomplish or quality, right? There are a risk that there are all of these places that we can get insights from to make our work more effective and more impactful on the people inside the organizations that we serve. And so my parting advice to anybody listening into this is don't ever stop learning, because there is always more to do. People are inherently messy creatures. That's good news for us because we'll continue to have jobs, and just stay curious.
Beautiful. I've learned so much today, as ever, just spending time with you. I'm so grateful for this format because I get, like I said, so much rich information within the hour. I know my listeners will feel the same too. Erica, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time. So great to get to know you better as well, because you're the figurehead of this powerhouse, but clearly you are the brains behind it as well. So you and the team, I know, work really hard to make it easier for the rest of us to not feel isolated and to leverage the strengths of each other. So thank you. Hopefully we'll have you back digging on some of these topics. Again, thanks to our sponsors, thanks to our host. We will be back again next week, but this is a real treat. I hope you've got this one bookmarked, and have a good
Hemma, thank you so much for having me. And for anybody out there who want to dig deeper into any of the work that we do, Hemma will tell you I am ubiquitous on LinkedIn. Please reach out to me. My colleague Bill Kaufman and I do a regular podcast series called Bella Ask, where we answer questions from our Bella community for the benefit of the broad ethics and compliance profession. And this is my reason for being, folks. Don't hesitate to ask me anything you'd like.
I'm sure lots will take you up on that. Thank you, Erica, for making yourself so accessible. We appreciate you.
Absolutely, Hemma. Thank you for having me. This was a really fun way to spend my morning.
I agree.